Section 37 of the Soul, or Rational Psychology. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Soul, or Rational Psychology, by Emanuel Swedenborg. Translated by Frank Sewall, 1837 to 1915, and others. Section 37. Chapter 21, Part 2. The Spiritual Loves, or the Loves of the Soul. The love of propagating the celestial society by natural means. 447. The love of propagating celestial society is spiritual. For example, the love of multiplying the members of society. This love is greater than the love of self, because it is on a plane with the love towards society. Since the soul knows that this society cannot be propagated unless by natural means, for instance by generation, therefore of itself it burns in this desire, which is the reason why venereal love is so vehement an affection of the animus. Spiritual love thus descends into nature, where the means are provided. But that this love, although made corporeal, may indeed remain spiritual in the mind, it is a pure and commendable love when it regards heaven for an end, and the increase of its society. There is in this love a love of multiplying oneself, for it does not consider the offspring as separated or disjoined from self, but it considers self together with the offspring as self multiplied. 448. But indeed the contrary love, or love of destroying the propagation of society, cannot exist, not even in the devil, for he loves his own society and hates the divine. Hence he eagerly desires the increase of members of his society, that it may prevail. It is for this reason, I believe, that God gave so great power to the devil, and united so great a society to him, that the love of propagation may not cease even in diabolical souls. The love of destruction or cruelty reveals a hatred which is so supreme that it rebels against the love of self, thus that it desires to be cruel against self, and wishes for the destruction of the universe. Thus in the human race there can exist a hatred that surpasses diabolical hatred. The love of one's own body. 449. The love of one's own body is not to be confounded with the love of self. Everyone loves his body because it is in connection with the soul, for the sake of propagation and multiplication in it of the soul, for the soul is continually conceived and multiplied. From this love flows the love of nourishing oneself, the sense of taste, also the love of protecting oneself from the surrounding vapors, whence is the sense of smell, also sight, and even pain, when force and injury are inflicted upon the body. Without this love, the ends and loves before mentioned could not be obtained. Everyone can love his body, and nevertheless love his neighbor as himself. For if he loves his neighbor as himself, then he loves the body on account of the love of self, and at the same time on account of the love towards society. While he does not therefore hate his body, he is still willing that it should be destroyed for the sake of society, rather than that society should perish, and finitely for God's sake would prefer this. Celestial society is one body, whose soul is God himself. Because one loves God and his celestial body, he does not love himself and his own body otherwise than as a part of that society, or for the sake of his being a constitutive part. 450. Hatred of one's body cannot exist, unless in so far as it, the body, is not in connection with its soul, and does not obey when the mind commands. For this very love is a connection of body and soul, but hatred is disjunction. So an artist does not love an instrument if it is not adapted to his use. However, when we love anything more than self, whether the love be genuine or not, as love of glory, fame, envy, riches, venery, then we prefer that love to the love of our corporeal life. But still we do not hate the latter. We love the body in so far as it is a means of obtaining that which is loved, and in so far as it is that which through the mind feels love. Thus when death is risked for love, it is not a hatred of life, but an indication that one desires that love may live. When, however, one is cut off from a hope of superior love, then he falls into the hatred of living in the body, and there is a desperation and insanity of the mind, for without that love he thinks that to live is not to live, or but to live in misery, and thus he desires his own extinction. But such an insane love or hatred of self is never conjoined with genuine and truly spiritual love, such as the love of deity, of friends, of propagating society. Therefore it is as contrary to the essence of true love as it is to wisdom, these two being very closely joined. The love of immortality. 451. The love of immortality is a spiritual love, and coincides with the love of God and of society. For the spiritual life is to be nearer to God, who is life itself, and by whom all things live. But it is spiritual death to be remote from him. Still that death is not extinction of essence, but is the extinction and privation of love, to which true life belongs. Just as a dark surface is not the extinction of light, but of a suffocation that cannot exist without light. Hence it appears that the love of immortality is not that of living to eternity, but of living well and happily. For the soul knows that it is to be immortal. Hence it does not love its own immortality, so far as this is assured, since all love presupposes a change and the possibility of a contrary, and otherwise it is no longer love. Therefore love perishes in those things which cannot be otherwise that they are, but the love of immortality appertains to those things which may be mortal or immortal, such as the exercise of love, charity, honor, virtue. These are all spiritually loved, in order that they may be immortal in oneself, since the mind or the soul is the subject of these loves, and they may or may not exist in it. Since, moreover, these are the means of meriting the favor of the supreme love, the soul loves these as means and also as an end, not on account of self that it may be eminent among its associates, but for the love of deity, and in order that there may be that in itself which it can communicate with its fellows to make the bond of love between them more close and binding. In this way it is better able to attach society to itself, and itself to society. 452. There is also a hatred of immortality, but not that which is absolutely such so long as some hope of happiness remains. Thus not in the devil even, until after the last judgment, when all hope is gone, and the happiness of the blessed becomes manifestly the source of pain. Thus there is a possible love of immortality in the vicious and criminal, in mostly resulting from the love of self. But the love of the immortality of vices arises when vices are esteemed as virtues, and when there is something in vice which savours of virtue. Besides, all love of immortality perishes in vices, and brings with itself a doubt regarding all immortality, and at length a denial. These are the effects of impiety. Spiritual zeal. 453. Zeal is the active and ardent principle in the above-mentioned loves, by which they are not only excited to loving, but also to promoting the means for obtaining the end. And so some spiritual zeal is present in every love. For love in itself is not active except in the degree in which it is also passive. Thus without zeal there is nothing in love proper to the subject in which the love resides. The zeal itself is the property of the spiritual soul, and it arises or is born and excited only by contraries. Thus without the actual existence of a contrary, or without the devil or contrary souls, there could be no zeal, but it would be a non-entity. Zeal is accordingly excited according to the degree of the assailing or the repugnant force, and it sets itself against its opponent as its enemy. Thus the stronger the diabolical society is, the greater is the zeal of the celestial society, and with the devil extinct this would also entirely subside. Thus there would be no kindling of minds, no anger of the animus, except from really exciting opponents. Zeal is in itself a love excited to a superior degree, in order that it may equal the opposing force which it desires to extinguish. 454. There is also a zeal in hatred, and indeed fierce and deadly, thus a rage and an impure burning fire. The anger therefore proceeds not from the zeal, but from the hatred, and is turned into fury. But true zeal never degenerates into anger, but is a mild and gentle fire, inwardly and not outwardly glowing. Thus it has been demonstrated both in spiritual and natural things that zeal or a righteous displeasure is able to extinguish the furies and tempestuous angers themselves, or that one good soul is able to put down thousands and myriads of bad souls and devils. For the devil does not ignore the truth, but hates it. Still, because he knows that it is the truth which he hates, he cannot help fearing the truth itself from a certain inmost essence, because it is stronger than himself. Thus one good angel is sufficient to cast down 1,000 devils, for they fly at the first blow, as those who are tormented by an evil conscience. This fear is innate, while in others there is no fear, but only the zeal which belongs to bravery. The love of propagating the kingdom and city of God. 455. This is a spiritual love, and flows immediately from the love of God and of society, but is excited and grows in zeal according to the degree of the opposition met. The kingdom of God is the celestial society of souls itself, the city of God being the terrestrial, which is the seminary of the celestial. This love of propagating the city of God or the church is the mind and spirit of our religion, and all the means of propagating this religion are subject to this love. 456. But the love of destroying the church is diabolical, and its kingdom is on this earth. It is the contrary of true religion. This subject would be too comprehensive for discussion here. The derivation of corporeal from spiritual loves, and their concentration in the rational mind. 457. From comparing loves together, the spiritual and the corporeal, for instance, it becomes evident enough that spiritual loves are the fountains of all corporeal loves. Consequently, that no corporeal love can exist unless a spiritual love pre-exists, and that the spiritual cannot exist unless there be actually a heaven or society of blessed souls, and a hell or society of infernal souls. For the one presupposes the other. As if you should deny the source, you would also deny the derivatives, and at length you would have to deny the existence of every affection of the body or of the animus. For nothing can exist from itself, it must flow from some principle to which it universally belongs. 458. Now, since the spiritual loves are the sources of the loves of the body or of the animus, so the particular loves of the body can be deduced like so many special determinations of a certain spiritual love. For there is an infinite variety of affections of the animus, but all may be subordinated and arranged in order, so that one may know from what source they flow. But this subordination cannot be unfolded and described, except in many pages. 459. But it may happen that there is a good spiritual love in the soul, and a bad one in the rational mind or in the body. Indeed, man himself is naturally good, and by use and habit becomes bad. Therefore, as the mind is not such as is the soul, and still less the body, therefore it belongs to God alone to judge concerning the soul and its love. For all the loves, both of the soul and of the animus, are concentrated in the rational mind, which thus is carried along, not only according to its own natural inclinations, but also according to principles acquired or intellectually learned. Likewise also it is drawn asunder by the authority of others, by use, and by the natural seductions of the pleasures of the body, and so another nature is induced upon it. The most universal source of the bodily and spiritual loves is the love of Deity above, and thence the love of the fellow man as of oneself. Pure or divine love viewed in itself. 460. God is the very spiritual esse in all things. And so far as the spiritual esse itself is in corporeal things, God is that very esse in those things, so that in him we live, move, and have our being. So far as God is the esse itself in all things, he is the love itself, which cannot but belong to that esse, which is from itself, and yet distinct from itself. For if God essentially proceeds from a created spirit, it is no spirit, since that it exists is not a property of spirit, but of him by whom it is created, in order that it may be. As we say from analogy, the body is not the soul, but the soul is the very esse of the body, so that if the soul departs, the body is no longer a body, but falls to decay. Whatever thus belongs to another, as a primitive to its derivative, must have an unbroken connection with it as to existence and substance. And if there is connection, there is love, which here coincides entirely with the connection. For love causes that one's own image may be seen in another, but according to the degree of derivation, and therefore imperfectly. Love may therefore be said to belong to him in whom there is an image of another, not that he loves himself, but that he loves in another that which he wishes to belong to himself, or to be conjoined to himself, so that, in other words, the love may be mutual. 461. Hence it appears that God is love itself, and that we are in so far divine as we mutually love God, and thus by love draw near to him. And because God is life itself and wisdom, it follows that we so far live and are wise as we draw near to God. Hence love is the very bond itself, the life and the wisdom. By love and this connection all those things are in us more perfectly. And so far as we remove from it, so far are these in us imperfectly, and indeed so imperfectly that they can hardly be said to be in us. Therefore the most absolute and universal source of all loves is the love of Deity toward us, and our mutual love to the God above us, which must be a love capable of being infinite, while our love of ourselves ought to be considered, when compared with that supereminent love, as the finite compared with the infinite. This infinite love is not possible, it is true, in our souls which are finite, but by the mercy of the love of God toward us, it is possible that our love may be exalted even to an indefinite degree. End of section 37.